Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome back. I'm Christine, and when we were last together, it was in Ashland, Oregon, home of the Shakespeare Festival. Well, I kind of left you hanging because I only told you the first half of the story of Esther when we were in Ashland, and it was summer then. As you can tell, it's winter now, but that's all right. Just life, such is life. Things happen, and but we're back together again now. So we're gonna just continue on. When we left off, our two characters, Esther and Mordecai, were not acting in alignment with who they were. They were hiding their identity. And certainly Esther, under the directive of her uncle Mordecai, was hiding her identity. So let's journey back and hear, in the words of Max Lucado, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. It was the 5th century BC, and it was the city of Susa, in the capital of the Persian Empire. The Israelites have been living in the area for over 100 years, once prisoners, now free. And here we find a beautiful girl named Esther, orphaned as a child, and then raised by her uncle Mordecai. She soon found herself in the middle, in the winter, of an unfolding story of prejudice and heroism and sacrifice. The villain in the story is Haman. Haman despises the Israelites, who are spread out in the 127 provinces throughout the Persian Empire. Esther's uncle, but if Haman had it in for one particular Israelite who refused to bow down to him as he passed by, it was Esther's uncle, Mordecai. Haman went to King Xerxes and convinced him that the Israelites were bad people who needed to be eliminated in the best interest of the kingdom. He suggested that the king issue an official decree giving permission for the Persians to kill any Hebrew that they came across on a particular day. To give incentive for such violence, the Persians could keep the possessions of the family that they destroyed. It was legalized lynching and looting. Well, the king went along with it, sealing the deal with his signet ring pressed into hot wax, which meant it was an irreversible plan. Not even the king could change it now. Well, Haman was very proud of himself. He couldn't wipe the smile off his face. Yet there was another storyline that was developing that would collide with him and his story in a big way. King Xerxes threw a big lavish party that lasted for 7 full days to show off his great wealth and power, which we talked about in the last video. The king, thoroughly drunk, decided to show off his beautiful queen. He summoned for her to come dressed in her royal robes. Well, Queen Vashti refused, and that greatly embarrassed the king. He burned with anger, and he put out a formal decree that the Queen Vashti be stripped of her status as queen and never to enter his presence again. It was time for a new queen. All of the young and beautiful women were brought to the palace to spend an evening with the king. The young woman selected was Esther, the young Hebrew girl raised by Mordecai. That's right, Mordecai, the same man that Haman had it in for. Well, no one made the connection because Esther hid her identity. Esther was crowned as king, but her people were soon to be destroyed, and time was running out. Mordecai sent word to his niece and told her that she must go before the king and plead for mercy for her people before it was too late. Well, she reminded Mordecai that a queen cannot just go before the king without being summoned. A queen could lose her life and certainly her position for messing with that rule. Mordecai responded with a declaration that was worthy of a Hollywood film. He said, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will come from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Wow. Where did that Mordecai, where's he been up until now? Well, he was becoming this one. And he just wasn't there yet. And the same is true for us. God's ultimate victory is certain. Isn't that the promise of Romans 8:28? In all things, God works for the good for all those who are called and for all those who love him. There will be decrees, there will be bullies along the way, but God will triumph. There will be dark times in the battle. The question is not, will he win, but will we suit up for his team? And Esther made her choice. "I will go to the king," she said, "even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Well, since the rule of the king was audience by invitation only, there's only one hope for someone who dared enter the king's presence uninvited. And that was that the king had to stretch out his gold scepter in favor of the visit. One queen had already been dismissed. Esther could be next. For 3 days, Esther prayed for favor, and then she entered the throne room without being summoned. I don't know, maybe Xerxes was in a good mood. Maybe he was allured by her beauty. Maybe he genuinely loved Esther. But whatever the reason, he not only welcomed her with an outstretched scepter, he told her to ask for whatever she wanted, even up to half the kingdom. Esther requested a small dinner party with the king and with Haman. The king agreed, and it took place that very evening. Haman went home with a swagger. Seizing massive momentum, Haman decided to erect a 75-foot pole with the intention of securing the king's permission to impale Mordecai on it. So the pole went up with full anticipation. It just so happened that the king had trouble sleeping that night. He had no sheep to count, nor NyQuil to take. So he had a servant read him a book that contained the daily log of all that had happened during his reign, the Chronicles of Success. And in the reading, they just so happened to come across an entry that spoke of a time that none other than Mordecai had come forward and blew the whistle on 2 members of the king's court who had been plotting the king's assassination. Well, King Xerxes inquired as to whether or not anything had been done to honor Mordecai for this heroic act. He hadn't. Well, the next morning when Haman arrived at the palace to make his request, the king asked him a question. What should the king do for someone who has brought great delight to the king? Well, arrogant Haman assumed that the king was referring to him. He was the king's right-hand man, after all. So he suggested that this person be put in royal robes and led through the city streets and praised. The king said, "Good idea. I want you to fetch Mordecai, put the robe on him, and I want you to personally drive him through the town in my stretch limo." Can you imagine the sick feeling in Haman's stomach? Haman left the palace to perform the hideous assignment. This didn't seem like the best time to get permission to impale Mordecai on the 75-foot pole. After the private parade of 1, it was time for dinner with the king. At the meal, Esther made her request that her people, the Israelites, be saved from the coming extermination. This was the first time that she revealed her identity to anyone. Esther said, The king inquired about who would order such an attack on his queen and her people. And Esther said, "You're sitting next to him. It's Haman." The king decided to impale Haman on the very pole that had been made for Mordecai. And Mordecai was given Haman's position and Haman's estate. Mordecai's first order of business was the irreversible edict that Haman had set in motion to allow the Jews to defend themselves. It was the best he could do. Non-Jewish people from over the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire attacked individual Jewish families in the greedy hope of looting their possessions. The Israelites, though, were ready. And over the next few days, they defeated 75,800 people. In the midst of a dark and shaky time, God used Esther to turn it around. Are you facing a situation right now that seems dark, complicated, hopeless? Take a tip from Mordecai and Esther and put your hope in this promise: God will ultimately win. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. Because of that promise, we can make our own. I will do what is right and trust God for the outcome.